Okay, so get ready because this deep dive is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at some pretty wild ideas. And honestly, it's less about hard facts and more like a thought experiment.
Mm-hmm.
You know how like sometimes the biggest mysteries in science feel almost mythological?
Yeah.
Well, today's sources kind of have us thinking about the Big Bang and the fall of angels.
Absolutely.
And trust me, the parallels are pretty mind-blowing.
It's definitely important to say right up front that we're not saying that these are literally the same story or anything like that.
Right.
The thing that's fascinating here is this comparison that an AI chatbot made between these two seemingly totally unrelated ideas.
Right.
Matter, antimatter, asymmetry in physics.
Yeah.
And then this idea of angelic rebellion.
It's not about proving that one is right or anything like that.
Wow.
It's more like we're holding up this cosmic mirror and seeing what kind of reflections we get.
What pops up.
So to get us started, let's like paint the before picture in both of these scenarios.
Okay.
What do you think?
Yeah, so in the scientific version, we're talking about the very first moments after the Big Bang.
Okay.
And the theory is that there was almost a perfect balance of matter and antimatter.
Mm-hmm.
Like two sides of the same coin, but with like opposite charges.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then on the biblical side, we've got the creation of the angels.
Right.
All initially good
Yeah.
and existing in perfect harmony with God.
Hmm.
So both of them start with this sense of balance and unity.
Yes.
Like a perfectly still pond.
Exactly. An undisturbed equilibrium.
Okay.
Just waiting for something to come along and just disrupt it.
Right.
And of course, in both stories, that's exactly what happens.
Right.
But the question is how?
So on the science side,
Yeah.
this is where it gets really, really interesting.
Okay.
Because the disruption comes in the form of a tiny asymmetry.
Okay.
There was actually just slightly more matter than antimatter.
Interesting.
Right at the beginning.
Yeah, and that tiny difference
It's crazy.
had a huge consequences. Yeah, matter and antimatter annihilate each other on contact.
Whoa.
So that means that small surplus of matter was literally all that was left to form everything that we see in the universe.
Really?
Stars, galaxies, planet, even us.
So we literally owe our existence to that tiny imbalance.
Yeah, it's a wild thought.
That is pretty wild.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, in the biblical story, the disruption of that initial angelic harmony comes from Lucifer's rebellion against God.
Okay.
He leads a group of angels to fall
Right.
and breaks that initial unity in the heavenly realm.
Yeah, it's almost like a cosmic mirror image, right?
Yeah.
A tiny, almost unnoticeable imbalance in the laws of physics leads to the creation of the entire universe.
It's crazy.
And this dramatic rebellion in the spiritual realm leads to the fall of angels.
Right.
Both of them shattering that initial state of perfect balance.
Okay, that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So what happens next?
What do you think?
I mean, after that initial disruption in both stories, does the casting out or the removal idea come into play here?
You're exactly right.
Oh.
That's where the parallel gets even more compelling.
Right.
Because in both scenarios, it's like one side gets removed or separated,
Right.
leaving the other to shape what's left behind.
Okay, I'm hooked.
All right.
Walk me through this.
Oh.
What does removal look like in each story?
So on the science side, because matter and antimatter annihilate each other on contact,
Right.
that initial asymmetry meant they basically wiped each other out.
Oh, wow.
Only that tiny surplus of matter was left to form everything we see around us.
So it's almost like matter won that primordial battle.
Yes.
And we're living in the world built from the spoils of that victory.
Precisely.
That's crazy.
It's pretty mind-blowing to think about it that way.
Yeah.
Now, on the biblical side, we have the rebellious angels being cast out of heaven.
Right.
Separated from those who remain faithful to God.
So both stories have this separation event where one side is removed from the picture, leaving the other to define the remaining reality.
Yeah.
It's amazing how these seemingly unrelated stories echo each other.
What's also striking is this concept of dominance in both cases.
Okay.
The winner of the initial conflict, whether it's matter or those loyal angels,
Right.
becomes the dominant force that continues to shape the story. Right.
It's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
So are you saying that matter, by its sheer abundance, dictates the rules of our physical reality? And in the biblical narrative, the loyal angels, by remaining in God's favor,
Right.
continue to influence the spiritual realm.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's as though these initial events set the stage for everything that comes after,
Wow.
establishing a kind of order based on which side prevails.
Right.
But it's not a simple black and white picture, is it?
You're right. It's more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
I mean, antimatter still exists.
Yep.
It's just incredibly rare in the universe today.
Right.
And those fallen angels, well, they're still out there somewhere, according to the story.
Lurking in the shadows.
Right, exactly.
So it's not about one side completely obliterating the other.
Right.
It's more like an ongoing tension between these opposing forces, a dynamic interplay that continues to shape our reality, both physical and spiritual.
It's starting to feel like we're talking about the yin and yang symbol.
Yeah.
With light and dark swirling together, each containing a seed of the other. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
Let's unpack this idea of dominance a bit more after a quick break.
Sounds good.
We'll be right back.
All right.
Okay, so we've got this idea of dominance playing out in both the scientific and biblical narratives.
Right.
But you mentioned it's not as simple as good versus evil or matter versus antimatter.
Right. It's definitely more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
Dominance in these stories isn't about total control.
Right.
It's more about which force establishes the prevailing conditions.
Yes.
The backdrop against which everything else unfolds.
So in the case of our universe, matter's dominance sets the stage for the laws of physics as we know them.
Exactly.
It determines how stars form, how planets come together, how life itself can even exist.
And if we look at it through the lens of the biblical story,
Okay.
the dominance of the loyal angels sets a kind of spiritual order.
Right.
It suggests that even though evil exists, it doesn't ultimately hold the reins.
But this makes me wonder if one side is dominant.
Yeah.
Does that mean the other is completely powerless? I mean, like we were saying before, antimatter still exists.
It does.
And those fallen angels are still out there somewhere.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it highlights the complexity of these narratives.
Okay.
Because even though one side establishes that dominant order,
Right.
the other side still exerts influence,
Okay.
albeit in a more subtle or hidden way.
So it's more like a constant push and pull between these opposing forces,
Yeah.
each shaping the other in a kind of cosmic dance.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Thanks.
And it brings to mind this concept of the yin and yang,
Oh, yeah.
where light and dark exist in this dynamic balance, each containing a seed of the other.
It's like even in dominance, there's always this element of its opposite present.
Yeah.
A reminder that reality isn't black and white.
Right.
And this makes me think about another parallel we touched on earlier,
Yeah.
the idea that tiny events can have huge consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling to think that a tiny bit more matter than antimatter resulted in the entire universe as we know it.
It's crazy.
And in the biblical narrative, one angel's rebellion just sparked this whole chain of events that continues to shape human history and spirituality.
It really makes you consider the weight of our own choices, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, if these grand narratives are any indication, even our seemingly insignificant actions could ripple outward, shaping the world in ways we might never fully grasp.
That's a profound insight. And it leads to another fascinating question.
What's that?
If even the smallest actions can have such far-reaching consequences, what does that say about our responsibility as individuals?
Like we're all holding these tiny pieces of that initial matter surplus, these sparks of creation.
Right.
And it's up to us to decide what we'll do with them.
Precisely.
Oh.
We're not just passive observers in this cosmic drama.
Well,
we're active participants, each contributing to the unfolding narrative.
Yeah.
And if these stories teach us anything, it's that our choices matter.
Okay.
Perhaps even more than we realize.
This whole conversation is really shifting my perspective.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see these old stories in a whole new light. And it's making me think about my place in the universe in a different way.
That's the power of exploring these kinds of connections. It challenges our assumptions and opens up new ways of understanding the world and our place within it.
But even with all these mind-blowing parallels, we're still left with some pretty big mysteries, right?
Yeah.
I mean, science can't fully explain why there was that initial matter surplus.
Right.
And the reasons behind Lucifer's rebellion are still debated in theological circles.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Both narratives ultimately point to a deeper mystery, a fundamental why that we might never fully grasp.
So maybe the real takeaway here isn't about finding definitive answers, but learning to embrace the mystery, the wonder of it all.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it.
Thanks.
Perhaps the true value lies in the journey of exploration itself, in continually seeking understanding, even if we never fully arrive at a singular conclusive truth.
I love that. It's like we're all on this grand quest for knowledge. And the more we learn, the more we realize how much we still don't know.
Exactly. It's a humbling and awe-inspiring realization.
This really is.
And as we continue to probe these mysteries, whether through scientific inquiry or spiritual contemplation, we uncover ever more intricate connections and breathtaking parallels, which further enrich our understanding.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. But before we get too lost in the cosmic weeds, maybe we should take a moment to reflect on what this all means for us here and now. How can understanding these grand narratives help us navigate the complexities and mysteries of our own lives?
That's the crucial question, and I think it's one we'll explore further after a short break.
Okay, so we've journeyed through the Big Bang and contemplated the fall of angels. And we've grappled with this idea that tiny causes can have universe-sized effects. But I'm kind of left wondering, what does all this cosmic pondering actually mean for us down here on Earth?
It's a great question. And, I think the answer might be different for everyone. But for me, one of the most powerful takeaways from these narratives is that we're not just these isolated individuals. We're part of something much larger than ourselves. Whether we look to science or religion, the message is pretty clear. We're active participants in a story that's been unfolding for billions of years.
That makes me think about those epic movies.
Oh,
where a seemingly ordinary person discovers they're actually the heir to some secret kingdom. Or they possess some hidden power that can change the world. Maybe we're all carrying around a bit of that chosen one energy without even realizing it.
I love that analogy. Because it speaks to the incredible potential that lies within each of us. Remember how we talked about matter's dominance shaping the laws of physics? And the loyal angels establishing a kind of spiritual order? Well, maybe by understanding these deeper forces, we can tap into a similar power to shape our own lives and the world around us.
So it's not just about recognizing that we're part of this grand narrative. But also understanding that we actually have a role to play in how it unfolds.
Exactly.
We're not just watching the movie, we're actually characters in it.
And that realization can be both empowering and, to be honest, a little bit daunting.
I can see that.
Because it means our choices, even the seemingly small ones, have consequences that ripple outward, affecting not just ourselves, but the larger web of existence.
Okay, now I'm really starting to feel the weight of all those seemingly insignificant decisions I make every day.
I understand.
It's what if choosing between pizza and salad for lunch actually has some kind of cosmic significance that I'm just not aware of?
Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But the point is, by recognizing our interconnectedness, by acknowledging the potential impact of our choices, we become more conscious creators. We start to ask ourselves, what kind of energy do I want to bring into the world? What kind of story do I want to contribute to?
That's such a powerful shift in perspective.
It is.
Instead of feeling overwhelmed by the vastness of the universe or feeling insignificant in the face of these grand forces, we can actually choose to embrace our role as co-creators.
Exactly. And maybe that's the most valuable takeaway from this whole deep dive. It's not about finding all the answers or resolving every mystery. It's about recognizing our own potential to shape the narrative. To contribute to the ongoing dance between order and chaos, light and darkness, matter, and antimatter, good and evil.
It's like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world. But now it's not just about changing the world out there, but also changing the world in here within ourselves.
That's beautifully put.
Thanks.
And as we change ourselves, as we become more conscious of our thoughts, actions, and intentions, we inevitably influence the world around us. It's like that ripple effect we talked about earlier. But now we're choosing to create ripples of compassion, kindness, understanding, and maybe even a little bit of cosmic wonder.
I have to say this whole conversation has been a real eye-opener.
Good.
Who knew that pondering the Big Bang and fallen angels could lead to such profound personal insights?
That's the magic of exploring these seemingly unrelated ideas, isn't it? By looking for connections, by venturing beyond the familiar, we often stumble upon truths that resonate deep within us.
So what do you say? Should we leave our listeners with a little homework?
Yeah, let's do it.
Maybe invite them to consider what dominance and tiny causes look like in their own lives? Or how they might be contributing to the ongoing cosmic narrative, even in the smallest of ways.
I love that, because ultimately this deep dive isn't just about the stories we've discussed.
Right.
It's about the stories we're all living and the stories we're all creating.
Right.
So to our listener, we leave you with this. What echoes of these grand narratives do you see in your own life?
Yeah.
What tiny choices are you making today that could have ripple effects far beyond your imagination?
It's pretty amazing.
And most importantly, what kind of story do you want to tell with your precious spark of creation? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
So feel free to share them with us. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.